long before the golden light of the Erdtree ever pierced the sky, long before the greater will cast its gaze upon the world, there existed something older, something stranger, something that defied the very notion of divine order. The crucible, the very first sentient life in the lands between, a primordial soup of churning, chaotic vitality that predates not only the Erdtree but even the greater will's direct influence, suggesting that life itself began not as a gift from the gods, but as something wild and untamed, a seething cauldron of existence where all things blended together without distinction or hierarchy. This singular fact rewrites everything you thought you understood about the world of Elden Ring. Because if the crucible came first, if life emerged independently of the cosmic forces that would later claim dominion over it, then the entire history of the lands between is not a story of creation, but a story of conquest, of newer powers imposing themselves upon older truths, of golden roots strangling what came before. What unfolds from this revelation is nothing less than the complete chronology of a world caught in an endless cycle of ambition, betrayal, and transformation, a realm where gods ascend and fall, where dragons ruled the skies before being broken by lightning, where giants were slaughtered to the last for the crime of tending a flame that threatened the new order, where the mightiest warriors were exiled and their descendants cursed to wander as outcasts, where a queen's ambition shattered the very laws of reality itself, and where you, the tarnished, were called back from death to either restore what was broken or burn it all down and begin anew. This is a world built on layers of forgotten history, each age burying the one before it, each new god rewriting the scripture to erase the old, and yet the truth persists in the ruins, in the incantations that remember the crucible's blessing, in the ancient dragon communion that predates the golden order, in the giant's flame that still burns atop the mountain, in the stars that were halted in their course, in the underground cities that thrived in eternal night, in the outer gods that whisper from beyond the veil, each one vying for control of a world that was never truly theirs to begin with. The lands between is a palimpsest, a manuscript scraped clean and written over again and again, but the old words bleed through if you know where to look, and what they spell out is a history far more complex and troubling than the golden propaganda of the two fingers would have you believe. To understand how a world could break so completely that its own goddess would flee, how an order so absolute could shatter into warring fragments, how demigods could descend into madness and corruption, how the very concept of death could be stolen and then returned in twisted form, how grace itself could be stripped away and then offered again as a leash. You have to understand not just the shattering, not just the war that followed, but the entire architecture of power that was built upon the crucible's grave. You have to understand that the Erdtree, that magnificent golden beacon that dominates every vista, is itself a parasite, its roots drinking deep from something older, its light a veil thrown over truths too primal for the golden order to acknowledge. You have to understand that Marika the Eternal, the goddess at the center of it all, was once a mortal, that her ascension was not inevitable, but engineered, that her empire was built on genocide and the systematic suppression of anything that remembered the world before. You have to understand that every demigod clutching their great rune is holding a fragment of a power that was never meant to be divided, that the Elden Ring itself is not a natural law, but an imposed one, a cosmic software update that overwrote the Lands Between's original operating system. You have to understand that the dragons who once ruled were not defeated by righteousness, but by a new kind of power, lightning harnessed and weaponized by Godfrey's warriors, and that their civilization, their ancient seat of power in Farum Azula, still crumbles outside of time itself, a monument to an age when scales and stone were the measure of all things. You have to understand that the fire giants were not monsters, but guardians, that the flame they tended was not evil, but simply incompatible with the Erdtree's vision, and that their extinction was so complete that only one remained, chained to his duty, even as his people's corpses froze in the snow around him. You have to understand that Godfrey, the first Elden Lord, was not retired but exiled, his usefulness exhausted once all the great enemies were slain, his warrior culture deemed too savage for the age of golden plenty that Marika envisioned, and that his tarnished warriors were stripped of grace and driven out to die in foreign lands, forgotten until the moment they were needed again. You have to understand that Radagon, Marika's second consort, was not a separate person, but her own other self, that the goddess was literally divided against herself, and that this schism at the heart of divinity may have been the crack that allowed the shattering to occur. You have to understand that the Night of Black Knives, when Godwyn the Golden was murdered and death was stolen from the Rune of Death, was not a random tragedy, but a conspiracy that reached into the highest echelons of power, and that Marika herself may have been complicit in the death of her own son. You have to understand that when Marika shattered the Elden Ring, when she took a hammer to the very laws of reality, it was not madness, but rebellion, a goddess turning against the outer god that had used her as a vessel, and that her punishment was to be imprisoned within the Erdtree, her body broken and suspended, neither alive nor dead, a puppet with cut strings. You have to understand that the demigods who went to war over the shards of the Elden Ring were not fighting for principle, but for power. That Radon held back the stars themselves, not to protect the world, but to freeze the fate of his bloodline. That Rykard fed himself to a god-devouring serpent in a bid for strength that cost him his humanity. That Mohg stole away his half-brother Miquella and tried to force a new age into being through blood and nightmare. That Malenia, the blade of Miquella, unleashed scarlet rot across entire regions in her battle with Radon, turning Caelid into a festering hellscape, and that even the most sympathetic of the demigods were still grasping for a power that was never meant for mortal hands, even if those hands in the ancient past, long before the rise of empires or the establishment of any recognizable order, there existed a state of being so fundamental and so primordial that it predates even the concept of separation itself. This is the era of the primordial crucible, a time when all life emerged from a single, unified source of boundless energy and infinite potential. To understand the world of Elden Ring, to truly grasp the foundations upon which every conflict and every ambition rests, we must first journey back to this beginning, to the moment when existence itself took its first breath. The primordial crucible was not merely a location or an object. It was a state of being, a swirling mass of vital energy from which all life would eventually spring forth. Imagine, if you will, a cosmic furnace where the very essence of life itself was being forged, refined, and given form. This was not a gentle process of creation, but rather a violent, chaotic melding of energies, a biological and spiritual cauldron where the boundaries between different forms of life had not yet been drawn. Every living thing that would come to inhabit the lands between, from the mightiest dragon to the smallest insect, from the noblest warrior to the most twisted monstrosity, all shared this common origin. The crucible was the great equalizer, the primordial soup from which diversity would eventually emerge. But in this earliest age, all life was intertwined, sharing not just an origin, but a unified form that blurred the distinctions we now take for granted. This interconnectedness was not merely spiritual or metaphorical. The creatures born in this era bore physical evidence of their shared heritage. The crucible's influence manifested in tangible ways, in the flesh and bone of living beings. The aspects of the crucible, those primal characteristics that would later be codified into incantations and abilities, were simply the natural state of existence during this time. Horns sprouting from unexpected places, tails extending from humanoid forms, breath weapons that channeled raw elemental fury. These were not mutations or aberrations, but the standard features of life as it first emerged. The crucible did not distinguish between what we might call human and beast, between civilized and monstrous. All were one, all were part of the same magnificent, terrible whole. The physical manifestation of the crucible's power took the form of a colossal tree, a structure so immense and so vital that it would shape the very geography and destiny of the world. This was the primordial Erdtree, though to call it simply a tree fails to capture its true nature. It was more accurately the Great Tree, the first and most ancient form of what would later become the Golden Erdtree we see dominating the skyline of the lands between. But this original tree was fundamentally different from its later incarnation, where the Golden Erdtree would come to represent order, hierarchy, and the imposition of divine law. The Great Tree of the Crucible era represented raw, untamed vitality. Its roots did not merely anchor it to the earth, but intertwined with the very essence of life itself, drawing power directly from the crucible and channeling it upward and outward. Its branches did not simply reach toward the sky, but extended into the fabric of existence, touching and connecting with every living thing. The great tree was both a physical structure and a metaphysical network. Through its roots and branches, the unified life force of the crucible flowed freely. There was no separation between the tree and the life it nurtured. They were one and the same, part of an unbroken cycle of energy and growth. The tree's sap was liquid vitality, its bark was hardened life force, its leaves were manifestations of pure potential. To stand before the great tree in this primordial age would have been to witness creation itself in its most active and undifferentiated state. From this era of unified life emerged creatures of tremendous power and majesty, beings that embodied the raw, untamed nature of the crucible itself. The dragons, those ancient lords of the sky and masters of primal forces, were born in this time. These were not the diminished remnants we might encounter in later ages, but dragons in their full, terrible glory. Ancient dragon Lanceax, Fortisax, and the mighty Grail. These legendary beings and their kin were direct products of the Crucible's power. They wielded lightning not through learned magic, but as an innate expression of their very nature. Their scales were harder than any forged metal, Their breath could reshape landscapes, and their presence commanded respect from all other forms of life. The dragons were, in many ways, the crucible's most perfect children, beings of such raw power and primal majesty that they would be remembered and revered long after the crucible era had passed into legend. But the dragons were not alone. Countless other creatures emerged during this time, each bearing the marks of the crucible's influence. Some combined features that would later be considered incompatible, mixing mammalian and reptilian traits, blending avian and terrestrial characteristics. The crucible did not recognize these boundaries. A creature might have the body of a lion, the wings of an eagle, the tail of a serpent, and the horns of a ram. And this would be perfectly natural, a simple expression of the unified life force that animated all things. These primordial beasts roamed a world that was itself still forming, still finding its shape and character. The aspects of the crucible that would later be codified into specific incantations were, in this era, simply the way life expressed itself. The aspect of the crucible, horns, an incantation that allows the caster to sprout horns and charge forward with tremendous force, is a direct echo of this primordial time when such physical transformations were commonplace. The aspect of the crucible, tail, which manifests a sweeping tail to strike at enemies, recalls an age when such appendages were natural features of many beings. The aspect of the crucible, breath, channeling elemental power through one's mouth, mirrors the innate abilities of the dragons and other ancient creatures. These incantations are not inventions or discoveries in the traditional sense. They are memories, genetic echoes, attempts to recapture a state of being that once defined all life. The misbegotten, those tragic creatures found throughout the lands between, are living testaments to the crucible's legacy. With their mismatched limbs, their bestial features grafted onto roughly humanoid frames, their wings that seem borrowed from other species entirely, the misbegotten are often viewed with disgust and fear by those who adhere to the strict order of later ages. But in truth, the misbegotten are not aberrations or mistakes. They are throwbacks, creatures whose physical forms more closely resemble the unified, undifferentiated state of life during the Crucible era. Their appearance is not a curse, but a connection to the ancient past, a reminder that all life once shared these characteristics. The persecution they face in later ages is a direct result of the Golden Order's rejection of the Crucible's chaotic vitality in favor of rigid, controlled perfection. Among the first to truly understand and harness the power of the Crucible were the Crucible Knights, an order of warriors whose very existence bridges the primordial past and the ordered present. These knights, clad in their distinctive armor, adorned with red cloth and bearing weapons of exceptional craftsmanship, were not merely soldiers, but living embodiments of the Crucible's power. Knights like Ordovis and Siluria, whose names would echo through the ages, learned to channel the aspects of the Crucible through their own bodies. They could sprout horns and charge with the force of ancient beasts, manifest tails to sweep aside multiple foes, and unleash breath attacks that channeled primal energies. The Crucible Knights were revered in their time, seen as paragons of strength and skill, warriors who had achieved a perfect synthesis between martial prowess and primordial power. The Crucible Knights served the Erdtree in its earliest form, protecting the great tree and the unified life force it represented. Their armor, forged with techniques that would be lost to later generations, incorporated elements of the crucible itself. The tree motifs on their equipment were not mere decoration, but symbolic representations of their connection to the source of all life. Their weapons, such as the Ordovis's great sword and the Siluria's tree spear, were not just tools of war, but sacred implements that channeled the raw, untamed power of the primordial age. To face a crucible knight in battle was to confront the living legacy of creation itself, to stand against a warrior who embodied an age when life was more vital, more powerful, and more unified than it would ever be again. The power of the crucible was fundamentally different from the magic and miracles that would develop in later ages. It was not learned through study or granted through faith. It was intrinsic, woven into the very fabric of existence. The crucible's energy was raw and untamed, resisting categorization or control. It did not follow rules because rules had not yet been established. It did not conform to order because order was a concept that belonged to a later, more restricted age. The crucible simply was a force of nature as fundamental as gravity or time, but far more alive, far more vital, far more dangerous. This era was defined by the concept of a unified life force, a single vital energy that animated all beings and connected them in ways both physical and spiritual. There was no hierarchy in the crucible, no chain of being that placed one form of life above another. A dragon was not superior to a beast. A beast was not superior to what would later be called a human. All were equal expressions of the same fundamental power. All were children of the same primordial source. This egalitarian aspect of the crucible would later be seen as threatening by those who sought to impose order and hierarchy on the world. The very idea that all life was fundamentally equal, that the distinctions between species and forms were superficial rather than essential, would become anathema to the Golden Order that would eventually rise to dominance. The great tree, drawing its power directly from the crucible, served as both a symbol and a conduit for this unified life force. Its roots extended deep into the earth, possibly reaching down to the very source of the crucible's power, while its branches reached high into the heavens, spreading the vital energy across the world. The tree was a living bridge between the depths and the heights, between the chaotic potential below and the manifested life above. Sap flowing through the great tree was not merely plant fluid, but concentrated life essence, capable of nurturing growth, healing wounds, and even granting power to those who could access it. The tree's leaves, when they fell, did not simply decay but returned their energy to the crucible, completing the cycle of life and death, creation and dissolution. Crucially, this primordial era predates the arrival of the Greater Will, that cosmic entity whose influence would later reshape the world entirely. The crucible existed before any outer god cast its gaze upon the lands between, before any divine mandate imposed structure on the chaos of creation. This is a vital point of understanding. The crucible was not created by the Greater Will, nor was it subject to its authority. The primordial state of life, the unified life force that connected all beings, was independent of and prior to any external divine intervention. The great tree was not the golden Erdtree, not yet transformed by the Elden Ring and the order it represented. This was a time of pure, unfiltered vitality, a time when life followed its own patterns and rhythms without regard for divine law or cosmic purpose. The physical mutations and shared characteristics visible among various life forms throughout the lands between are direct evidence of the Crucible's lasting influence. Even after countless ages, even after the imposition of the Golden Order and the attempt to standardize and control the forms that life could take, the Crucible's legacy persists. Creatures with unexpected appendages, beings that combine features from multiple species, individuals born with horns or tails, or other traits that mark them as different from the accepted norm, all of these are echoes of the primordial age. They are reminders that beneath the ordered surface of the world lies a deeper, older truth that all life shares a common origin in the chaotic vitality of the Crucible. The Crucible era represents a time of possibility, a time before limitations were imposed, before life was sorted into acceptable and unacceptable forms. It was an age of raw creation, where the full potential of existence was on display in all its terrible beauty and beautiful terror. Understanding this era is essential to understanding everything that follows, for the entire history of the lands between can be seen as a long, slow process of moving away from the Crucible's unified chaos toward increasingly rigid forms of order, and the conflicts that arise from those who resist this process, those who remember or long for the primordial state when all life was one. Transitioning from the primordial chaos of the Crucible, we now move forward into what scholars of the lands between call the ancient past, specifically the era when the Greater Will first made its presence known. This period marks perhaps the single most transformative event in the history of the world, a cosmic intervention that would reshape not just the physical landscape, but the very metaphysical foundations of existence itself. The Greater Will, an entity classified among the outer gods, those incomprehensible beings that exist beyond the material plane, extended its influence across the vast expanse to reach the lands between. Unlike the raw, unfiltered vitality of the Crucible, the Greater Will represented something fundamentally different: order, purpose, and hierarchy. Where the Crucible had been a churning wellspring of chaotic potential, the Greater Will sought to impose structure upon the world, to categorize and control the very nature of life and death. The mechanism through which this outer god would exert its dominion came in the form of a living monument, a symbol of its power that would grow to dwarf mountains and reshape continents. From the earth itself, nourished by forces that remain mysterious, even to the most learned scholars, the Erdtree sprouted. This was no ordinary tree, no simple plant that might be measured in feet or even yards. The Erdtree grew to become a colossal golden beacon visible from every corner of the lands between, its branches spreading across the sky like veins of liquid light, its roots burrowing deep into the bedrock of the world. The tree drew its power directly from the Greater Will, serving as a conduit between the outer god and the material realm. Its bark shimmered with an otherworldly luminescence, and from its boughs fell leaves that seemed to contain captured starlight. The Erdtree was not merely a symbol of the Greater Will's power, but an active instrument of transformation, a living engine that would fundamentally alter the rules by which the lands between operated. With the Erdtree's establishment came the formalization of the Golden Order, a comprehensive system of laws, religious doctrine, and metaphysical principles that promoted the Erdtree's grace above all other forms of power or worship. The Golden Order was both a philosophy and a governing structure, a way of understanding the cosmos that placed the greater will at the apex of all existence. Its tenets emphasized purity, hierarchy, and the supremacy of gold, that most perfect of metals, which came to represent the ideal state toward which all things should aspire. The Golden Order taught that grace, a tangible blessing that manifested as golden light visible to the faithful, flows from the Erdtree to those deemed worthy by the greater will. This grace would guide the chosen, marking them for greatness and providing them with strength beyond mortal limits. But the rise of the Erdtree and the establishment of the Golden Order came at a tremendous cost to what had existed before. The Crucible, that primordial wellspring that had given birth to such wondrous and terrible diversity, found its influence waning as the Erdtree's dominance grew. The Golden Order viewed the Crucible's chaotic mixing of forms as impure, as a deviation from the perfection that gold represented. Those creatures and beings that bore the marks of the Crucible, the blended characteristics that spoke to the primordial era's creative abundance, found themselves increasingly marginalized and eventually persecuted. The mixed forms of life that had once been celebrated as expressions of vitality became stigmatized as aberrations, as failures to conform to the Golden Order's vision of proper existence. The primordial crucible, once the acknowledged source of all life in the lands between, was gradually replaced in both practice and memory by the Erdtree's singular golden grace. Where the crucible had offered infinite possibility, the Erdtree offered something the Golden Order considered superior: purpose and direction. The tree's grace did not scatter itself randomly among all living things, but instead selected specific individuals, marking them as chosen and worthy. This selectivity became a cornerstone of the Golden Order's philosophy, creating a hierarchy of the blessed and the graceless, the worthy and the unworthy. The Erdtree's roots, spreading invisibly through the earth like a vast underground network, began to absorb the life and power that had once flowed from the crucible. In essence, the new order was quite literally feeding upon the old, drawing sustenance from the primordial energies that had preceded it. Yet the Erdtree's arrival was not the first time the lands between had known rule by a higher power. Long before the golden tree pierced the sky, the ancient dragons had established their own dominion over the world. These were not the lesser drakes or wyverns that would later populate the realm, but true dragons, beings of immense power and intelligence who commanded the primal forces of storm and lightning. They were led by Placidusax, the Dragon Lord, a being of such might that even the fragmentary records that survive speak of him with reverence bordering on terror. Placidusax ruled from Farum Azula, a city that floated among the storm clouds, defying the very laws of nature through the dragon's mastery of ancient storm magic. The dragon civilization predated the Erdtree's arrival by an age difficult to measure, and their rule had been absolute. The relationship between the ancient dragons and the arriving Erdtree remains a subject of scholarly debate. Some texts suggest a period of coexistence, others hint at conflict, while still others propose that the dragons simply withdrew from the world's stage as the greater will's influence grew. What is clear is that the dragon civilization entered a period of decline that coincided with the Erdtree's ascendance. Placidusax himself would eventually enter a state of hibernation, waiting for the return of a god who had fled, though whether this god was connected to the greater will or represented some other power entirely remains uncertain. The great floating city of Farum Azula would persist, frozen outside of time itself through means unknown, a monument to the age when dragons, rather than the Golden Order, held sway. As the Erdtree's roots spread deeper and wider, they began their work of absorption in earnest. The crucible-blessed creatures, those beings who embodied the primordial era's creative chaos, found their very essence being drawn into the tree's vast network. The Erdtree did not simply kill these beings, but rather incorporated them, transforming their wild vitality into the refined grace that it distributed to its chosen. This process was gradual, taking place over generations, but its effects were inexorable. Creatures that had once thrived under the crucible's influence found themselves weakening, their offspring born with diminished powers, their connection to the primordial source growing ever more tenuous. The Golden Order, now firmly established as the dominant religious and political force in the lands between, began systematic persecution of those who bore what came to be known as crucible aspects. These were physical manifestations of the primordial era, horns that sprouted from unexpected places, scales that covered portions of otherwise smooth skin, tails, wings of unusual configuration, and other features that spoke to the crucible's tendency to blend and mix characteristics across species. What had once been seen as marks of blessing, signs that an individual carried the crucible's creative power, became stigmatized as deformities and signs of impurity. The Golden Order's fundamentalists, scholars who devoted themselves to understanding and enforcing the greater will's tenets, declared that such aspects represented a deviation from the proper form ordained by the Erdtree. Those born with crucible aspects found themselves cast out from society, labeled as omens, a term that carried connotations of ill fortune and divine disfavor. The persecution was not limited to social ostracism. Many bearing these aspects were imprisoned, their horns sawed off in brutal rituals meant to purify them, though such mutilations often proved fatal. The Golden Order taught that to bear a crucible aspect was to carry a curse, a stain that marked one as unworthy of the Erdtree's grace. This represented a complete inversion of values from the Crucible era, when such diversity had been the natural order. Ironically, the earliest champions of the Erdtree, warriors known as the Crucible Knights, retained some of the primordial power they had been tasked with suppressing. These elite fighters had emerged during the transitional period when the Erdtree was still establishing its dominance, and they had been granted access to incantations that drew directly upon crucible energy. They could manifest aspects themselves in controlled bursts, sprouting horns or tails or wings as needed for combat, then retracting them when the battle ended. The Crucible Knights represented a bridge between eras, embodying both the new order's discipline and the old power's raw strength. Their armor, wrought in imitation of the Erdtree's golden bark, but incorporating design elements that recalled the Crucible's organic chaos, symbolized this duality. As generations passed, however, even the Crucible Knights found their status diminishing. The Golden Order's later champions, paladins and clerics, who drew their power purely from the Erdtree's grace, without any taint of the primordial, came to be seen as more ideologically pure. The Crucible Knights, once celebrated as the Erdtree's first defenders, became viewed with suspicion, their connection to the old power making them uncomfortable reminders of what the Golden Order had supplanted. Its many would eventually find themselves serving as bodyguards to nobles or wandering as masterless warriors, their services still valued for their martial prowess even as their methods fell out of favor. The Erdtree's influence continued spreading, transforming not just the social and religious landscape, but the physical terrain of the lands between itself. Regions that had once been wild and untamed found themselves touched by the tree's golden light, and with that light came change. Plants began growing in new configurations, their leaves taking on golden hues at the edges. Animals that drank from streams fed by the Erdtree's runoff found their lifespans extended, their bodies suffused with a faint luminescence. The very stones of the earth seemed to resonate with the tree's presence, and miners discovered new veins of materials that had not existed in the Crucible era, stones that hummed with golden energy. The landscape transformation was most dramatic near the tree itself, in the region that would come to be known as Lanedell. Here, the Erdtree's roots broke through the surface in massive golden arches, creating natural bridges and barriers that shaped the development of what would become the capital city. The soil in this region proved extraordinarily fertile, yielding crops of unprecedented abundance. Water that flowed near the tree's roots gained healing properties, and those who bathed in such waters found their ailments eased, their wounds closing faster than natural. These blessings made the area around the Erdtree the most desirable land in all the lands between, and control over this territory became a source of conflict among the various tribes and peoples. The very nature of life in the lands between underwent fundamental alteration. Under the Crucible, death had been a return to the primordial soup, a dissolution back into the chaotic potential from which new life would spontaneously emerge. The Erdtree introduced a different system. Souls of the dead, rather than returning to formless potential, were now drawn to the tree itself. The Erdtree absorbed these souls, and from this absorption, it generated the grace that it bestowed upon the living. This created a cycle that was simultaneously more orderly and more hierarchical than what had existed before. Death became not an ending or a transformation, but a contribution to the Erdtree's power, and through the Erdtree, to the greater will's influence over the material world. The Golden Order's tenets became the dominant religion, systematically replacing the older forms of worship that had existed in the Crucible era, where before, various tribes and peoples had venerated the primordial chaos itself or the specific aspects of the Crucible that had blessed their ancestors. Now all were expected to bow before the Erdtree and acknowledge the greater will's supremacy. Temples to older powers were repurposed or destroyed, their priests either converting to the new faith or being driven into hiding. The Golden Order's missionaries spread across the lands between, carrying the message of grace and hierarchy to even the most remote regions. The Erdtree's sap, a substance that came to be known as Erdtree's blessing, became a source of healing and power that reinforced the new order's dominance. This golden liquid, which occasionally seeped from the tree's bark or could be found in crystallized form near its roots, possessed remarkable properties. When consumed or applied to wounds, it accelerated healing far beyond what any herb or potion from the Crucible era could achieve. Warriors anointed with Erdtree's blessing found their strength enhanced, their endurance multiplied. Scholars who studied while under its influence reported heightened clarity of thought and improved memory. The blessing became a valuable commodity, carefully controlled and distributed by the Golden Order's priesthood, who used it to reward the faithful and punish the disobedient by withholding it. Central to the Golden Order's philosophy was the concept of grace as a guiding light from the Erdtree. This grace manifested as golden rays that were visible only to those blessed by the greater will, appearing as luminous threads that pointed toward destiny and purpose. Those who could see grace found themselves guided toward great deeds, toward encounters and challenges that would test and refine them. The grace pointed the way to dungeons holding powerful artifacts, to battlefields where glory could be won, to places where the Golden Order needed champions. This guidance system created a class of grace-given warriors and heroes who became the enforcement arm of the new order, spreading its influence through their deeds. Yet grace was selective, and this selectivity was intentional. The Golden Order taught that only those who embodied the proper virtues, who lived according to the greater will's design, would be blessed with grace. Those who fell from favor, who committed acts deemed sinful by the Golden Order's laws, would find their grace fading, the golden light disappearing from their sight. To be stripped of grace was to be cast into darkness, to lose not just divine favor, but also the practical advantages that grace provided. This created a powerful incentive for conformity, for adherence to the Golden Order's increasingly rigid codes of conduct. The Golden Order began establishing its dominion over the various tribes and peoples of the lands between through a combination of spiritual authority and practical power. The grace-given warriors served as both examples and enforcers, demonstrating the benefits of submission to the new order while also crushing those who resisted. Tribal leaders were offered positions within the emerging hierarchy if they converted their people to worship of the Erdtree, while those who refused found themselves facing armies blessed with the tree's power. Gradually, through conversion and conquest, the Golden Order extended its reach across the known world, bringing all under the Erdtree's golden shadow. Long before the Erdtree's roots sank deep into the soil of the lands between, before the Greater Will's golden light bathed the world in its radiance, another power held dominion over this ancient lands. We now turn our attention to the Age of Dragons, an epic stretching back into the mists of the ancient past, when scaled titans ruled from storm-wreathed peaks, and reality itself bent to their will. The ancient dragons, beings of stone and lightning, whose very existence predated the concepts of life and death as we understand them, stood as the supreme authority in this primordial era. These were not the lesser drakes or wyverns that would later populate the world's caves and cliffsides. The ancient dragons were something far more magnificent and terrible, creatures whose bodies were formed from living stone, whose scales reflected the color of storm clouds, and whose eyes held the wisdom of countless ages. They wielded red lightning, a power fundamentally different from the golden bolts that would later become associated with the Erdtree's order. This crimson electricity was raw, primal, and capable of rending the very fabric of space and time. At the apex of this draconic hierarchy stood Dragon Lord Placidosax, a being of such immense power and majesty that his form defied simple description. Placidusax was not merely a king or a ruler in the political sense. He held the title of Elden Lord, a position that would later be claimed by champions of the Golden Order, but which in this ancient age meant something altogether different. As Elden Lord, Placidusax served as the consort and champion of a god, an outer god whose nature and identity have been lost to the erosion of time. This god, whoever or whatever they were, represented the true form of what would later be called the Erdtree, though scholars debate endlessly about what this actually means. Some believe this god was an earlier manifestation of the cosmic tree itself, before the greater will claimed it. Others suggest it was an entirely separate entity, a rival power that once held sway over the same mystical nexus that the Erdtree would later occupy. The capital of this draconic empire was Farum Azula, a city that exists in a state beyond conventional time. Even in the present era, when you eventually reach this crumbling citadel, suspended in the eye of a perpetual storm, you find it partially phased out of temporal reality, its stones existing simultaneously in multiple moments. In the Age of Dragons, Farum Azula stood complete and magnificent, a testament to the dragon's mastery over the fundamental forces of existence. Its architecture blended seamlessly with the natural stone of the floating islands upon which it was built, creating structures that seemed to have grown rather than been constructed. Massive pillars carved with draconic script rose toward the churning heavens, and temples dedicated to their absent god dominated the skyline. This absent god, the deity to whom Placidusax had pledged his eternal service, vanished at some point before or during the rise of the Golden Order. The circumstances of this disappearance remain one of the great mysteries of the Lands Between's history. Did this god flee before the Greater Will's arrival? Were they defeated in some cosmic conflict beyond mortal comprehension? Or did they simply abandon their creation, leaving their faithful servant to wait in vain? Whatever the truth, Placidusax's devotion never wavered. The Dragon Lord took up a vigil in the heart of Farum Azula, lying in patient expectation of his god's return, even as the ages rolled past and his own body deteriorated, his multiple heads eventually sundered from his neck, leaving only stumps that crackled with residual lightning. The ancient dragon's power was not limited to physical might or elemental fury. They possessed an understanding of reality's underlying structure that allowed them to manipulate time and space in ways that the later inhabitants of the Lands Between could scarcely imagine. This knowledge was encoded in their ancient prayers and incantations, formulas of power that would persist long after the dragon's dominion ended. The dragon cult, which would arise during the transition between the Age of Dragons and the Age of the Erdtree, would preserve fragments of this knowledge, though much would be lost or deliberately suppressed by the Golden Order. Among the ancient dragons, certain individuals stood out for their unique characteristics and the roles they would play in the coming transformation of the world. Lanceax, a female ancient dragon of considerable power, displayed a curiosity about the younger races that was unusual among her kind. She took on a human-like form, a practice that required immense magical skill and a willingness to temporarily abandon the superiority of the draconic body. In this guise, she communed with human knights, teaching them the ways of dragon worship and sharing fragments of the ancient dragon's lightning incantations. Her actions represented an early bridge between the draconic and human worlds, a connection that would prove significant as the balance of power began to shift. The knights who learned from Lanceax became the foundation of what would later be known as the Dragon Cult. Warriors who wielded red lightning in service to the ancient dragons and later in memory of them. Fortisax, identified in ancient texts as the younger brother of Dragon Lord Placidusax himself, was renowned as a warrior even among the mighty ancient dragons. His mastery of red lightning was unparalleled, and his combat prowess had been proven in countless battles against threats to the Draconic Order. Fortisax embodied the martial excellence of his kind, and his scales bore the scars of conflicts that had taken place in ages so remote that no written record of them survived. He would later play a crucial role in the relationship between the dragons and the emerging Golden Order, though that role would ultimately lead to tragedy. The dragon's reign, seemingly eternal and unassailable, began to face its first serious challenge with the rise of the Golden Order. The Greater Will, having established the Erdtree and begun to spread its influence across the lands between, sought to bring all lands and all peoples under its dominion. The ancient dragons, with their allegiance to a different god and their own established order, represented an obstacle to this universal ambition. The conflict that arose was not merely territorial or political, it was fundamentally theological, a clash between competing visions of how reality should be ordered and which cosmic power deserved supremacy. Godfrey, the first Elden Lord in service to the Greater Will, and Queen Marika, led the Golden Host against the ancient dragons in a war that shook the very foundations of the world. Godfrey was a warrior of legendary prowess, a man whose strength was so great that he had to restrain it with Sarosh, the Beast Regent, who clung to his back and tempered his bloodlust. The Golden Host he commanded represented the full military might of the emerging Golden Order, an army of warriors blessed by the Erdtree and armed with weapons infused with holy power. The battles between Godfrey's forces and the ancient dragons were cataclysmic, reshaping landscapes and leaving scars on the land that would persist for millennia. During this brutal conflict, a practice emerged that would have lasting consequences for both sides. The Dragon Communion ritual, a dark and primal magic, allowed humans to consume the hearts of slain dragons and thereby absorb a portion of their power. This was not a gift from the dragons, nor was it sanctioned by the Golden Order's official doctrine. Instead, it represented a desperate and transgressive attempt by warriors to gain the strength necessary to stand against draconic might. Those who partook of Dragon Communion found their bodies slowly transforming, scales erupting from their skin, their eyes taking on the reptilian cast of their devoured prey. The ritual was both effective and corrupting, granting power at the cost of one's humanity. Churches dedicated to this practice sprang up in remote locations, hidden from the Golden Order's disapproving gaze, where desperate warriors could offer dragon hearts and receive transformative power in return. The tide of war might have continued indefinitely, with neither side able to achieve total victory, had it not been for an unexpected development. Godwyn, known as the Golden, the firstborn son of Godfrey and Queen Marika, encountered Fortisax during the conflict. The exact circumstances of their meeting have been lost to history, but the outcome was remarkable. Rather than fighting to the death As might have been expected, Godwyn and Fortisax formed a bond of friendship and mutual respect. This was no small feat. Godwyn represented the future of the Golden Order, the golden child of the New Age, while Fortisax was the brother of the Dragon Lord himself, a living embodiment of the Old Order. Yet somehow, these two warriors from opposing sides found common ground. Godwyn's friendship with Fortisax became the foundation for a truce between the Golden Order and the ancient dragons. The terms of this peace were significant. The dragons would not be exterminated or enslaved, as had been the fate of so many other peoples who resisted the Golden Order's expansion. Instead, they would be incorporated into the new order, their power acknowledged and even revered, though subordinated to the Greater Will's ultimate authority. This compromise represented a pragmatic recognition by both sides that continued war would be too costly. For the Golden Order, it meant securing the dragon's considerable power as an asset rather than facing them as an eternal enemy. For the dragons, it meant survival, though at the cost of their independence and supremacy. The truce marked a fundamental turning point in the history of the lands between. The Age of Dragons was effectively over, though the dragons themselves had not been eliminated. Instead, they had been integrated into a new order, their ancient ways becoming subsidiary tradition within the larger framework of the Golden Order's dominance. The dragon cult, which had begun with Lanciax's teachings to human knights, became an officially tolerated practice, though one viewed with some suspicion by the Golden Order's more orthodox adherents. Knights who wished to wield the power of red lightning could do so, but always with the understanding that this power was now channeled in service to the Erdtree and the Greater Will. Many ancient dragons were slain during the war, their massive corpses left to decay across the lands between, becoming landmarks in their own right. Others retreated to remote locations, withdrawing from the world of men and gods to nurse their wounds and mourn their lost supremacy. Some fled to Farum Azula, joining their lord Placidusax in his timeless vigil, waiting for a god who would never return. The population of ancient dragons dwindled dramatically, and those who remained found themselves increasingly isolated, relics of a bygone age in a world that had moved on without them. Dragon Lord Placidusax himself remained in Farum Azula, lying in state at the heart of the storm-racked city. His physical form bore the marks of the transition between ages. His heads, once numerous and terrible, had been sundered, leaving only stumps that occasionally regenerated in ghostly, translucent forms during moments of extreme duress. Whether this mutilation occurred during the war with the Golden Order, in some earlier conflict, or as a self-inflicted wound of grief over his god's abandonment, no record clearly states. What is certain is that Placidusax never abandoned his post, never ceased his waiting, even as the city around him crumbled and phased in and out of temporal reality. His continued existence served as a living monument to the Age of Dragons, a reminder that the Golden Order's triumph, total as it seemed, had been built upon the ruins of an earlier civilization. The legacy of the Age of Dragons would persist long after their dominion ended. Dragon-worshipping cults would continue to practice their rituals in hidden churches. Knights would still seek out the power of red lightning, studying the ancient incantations preserved from draconic teachings. The very landscape of the lands between bore the marks of draconic influence, from the dragon burnt ruins to the great worm corpses that dotted the countryside. And in the distant future, when the Golden Order itself began to crumble and the shattering threw the world into chaos, some would look back on the Age of Dragons as a time of stability and power, wondering if perhaps the world had chosen the wrong god to follow. Transitioning from the ancient dominion of the dragons, we now shift our gaze to another monumental conflict that shaped the very fabric of the lands between. Our timeline advances into the ancient past, specifically the era of the giants, where a new power would rise and challenge the established order. This period marks a pivotal moment in the history of Queen Marika and the nascent Golden Order, setting the stage for many of the events you will encounter much later in your journey through the lands between. In the frigid, craggy expanse of the mountaintops of the giants, a formidable race of colossal beings, known simply as the Fire Giants, held sway. These beings, with their immense stature and formidable strength, were not merely inhabitants of this desolate region, but also the devoted worshippers of a truly terrifying entity, the Fell God. The Fell God was not merely a deity, but an outer god, an incomprehensible cosmic entity whose influence manifested as a raging, destructive fire. This primordial flame, a force of pure annihilation, was the source of the fire giants' immense power, imbuing them with a resilience and ferocity that made them a truly terrifying force to behold. Their very existence was intertwined with this destructive fire, their bodies often showing signs of its searing touch, and their culture revolved around its worship and propagation. The sacred flame burned eternally within the great forge of the mountain tops, a beacon of their faith and a symbol of their untamed power. It was against this backdrop of ancient, fiery might that Queen Marika the Eternal, driven by the expansionist and unifying tenets of the Golden Order, initiated a war. The Golden Order, still in its relatively early stages of establishing dominance across the lands between, viewed the untamed power of the Fell God and its worshippers as an existential threat, an affront to the ordered golden light it sought to spread. Marika, a figure of immense power and unwavering resolve, saw the fire giants as an obstacle to the complete subjugation and integration of all peoples and lands under the banner of the Erdtree. The conflict was not merely territorial, but ideological, a clash between the ordered, life-affirming light of the Erdtree and the chaotic, destructive flame of the Fell God. Marika's forces, a formidable army forged in the crucible of previous conflicts, marched upon the mountaintops. Among her most potent weapons was her shadow-bound beast, Malekith, a colossal black gargoyle-like figure whose loyalty to Marika was absolute and whose power was legendary. Shadow-bound beasts, for those unfamiliar, are powerful, loyal companions bound to Empyreans, individuals chosen by the greater will to potentially succeed Marika. Malekith, in particular, was a being of immense strength and a master of the destined death, a potent form of magic that could permanently extinguish life. The battles that ensued were nothing short of cataclysmic. The frozen peaks echoed with the thunderous roars of the giants and the clang of steel against stone, the air thick with the acrid smell of burning flesh and the chill of destructive magic. Marika's legions, comprised of her most skilled knights and warriors, engaged in fierce, protracted battles against the towering fire giants. The giants, fueled by the destructive power of the fell god's flame, proved to be incredibly resilient foes, their hides impervious to many conventional attacks, and their blows capable of leveling entire formations of soldiers. Their attacks often involved spewing torrents of flame, incinerating everything in their path, or wielding massive weapons capable of crushing even the most heavily armored knights. The strength of the giants, as mentioned, was intrinsically tied to the destructive power of the fell god's flame. This made them not only formidable in direct combat, but also incredibly difficult to truly defeat. Their very essence seemed to draw upon this primordial fire, allowing them to regenerate and withstand wounds that would fell lesser beings. To extinguish a fire giant was to extinguish a spark of the fell god itself, a task that required immense power and specialized tactics. The Golden Order's forces, despite their discipline and numbers, found themselves facing an enemy unlike any they had encountered before, an enemy whose very being was a conduit for an outer god's destructive will. It was in this desperate struggle that Malekith, Marika's loyal shadow, truly distinguished himself. Wielding the power of destined death, Malekith was uniquely equipped to combat the fire giants. His attacks, imbued with the potent magic of true death, were one of the few forces capable of permanently severing the giants' connection to the fell god's flame and preventing their regeneration. He moved like a dark whirlwind across the battlefields, engaging and defeating many of the most powerful fire giants, his blows leaving behind a trail of extinguished life and silent, fallen colossi. His role was absolutely crucial, turning the tide in many engagements where Marika's forces might otherwise have been overwhelmed. Without Malekith, it is highly probable that the war would have dragged on for far longer, or perhaps even ended in Marika's defeat. The war, a brutal and protracted affair, ultimately culminated in the near annihilation of the fire giant race. Their numbers, once vast, were decimated, their formidable power broken by the combined might of Marika's army and Malekith's unique abilities. The mountaintops, once a bustling domain of these fiery beings, became a graveyard of colossal forms, their immense bodies scattered across the icy landscape, a testament to the ferocity of the conflict. The Golden Order had achieved a decisive, if costly, victory. Yet a singular colossal figure remained. This last fire giant, a truly monstrous being with a gaping maw on its stomach, a visible manifestation of the fell god's flame it harbored, was discovered tending the sacred flame within the forge. This was the last bastion of the fire giant's power, the final living link to the destructive outer god. This surviving giant was not just a warrior, but a priest, a keeper of the flame, its very being dedicated to the perpetuation of the fell god's power. Its massive form, scarred and ancient, stood as a defiant sentinel against the encroaching Golden Order. It was Queen Marika herself who personally confronted and defeated this last, formidable fire giant. This was not a task she delegated, but one she undertook to solidify her victory and demonstrate the absolute supremacy of the Golden Order. The specifics of their confrontation are shrouded in the mists of time, but it is clear that Marika, in her prime, was a warrior of immense power and skill. She overcame the last of the giants, not merely through brute force, but likely through a combination of her divine power and strategic prowess. The defeat of this final giant marked the true end of the war, a definitive victory for the Golden Order. However, Marika's actions following this victory were not simply about extermination. Rather than extinguishing the last fire giant entirely, she enacted a profound and terrible curse. She condemned the surviving fire giant to an eternal existence, forcing it to forever stoke the flame of ruin within its own colossal body. This was not an act of mercy, but one of calculated control. The flame of ruin, as it became known, was the very essence of the fell god's destructive power, and Marika, in her wisdom, or perhaps her fear, understood that completely eradicating an outer god's influence was a near impossible task. Instead, she chose to contain it. This curse served a dual purpose. Firstly, it prevented the fell god's flame from ever being truly extinguished, ensuring its continued existence, albeit in a controlled and contained manner. Marika's actions suggest a deep understanding of the nature of outer gods, recognizing that their influence, once established, is incredibly difficult to completely erase. By containing the flame within the last fire giant, she effectively quarantined its destructive potential, preventing it from spreading unchecked across the lands between. Secondly, it served as a perpetual monument to the Golden Order's victory, a living, suffering testament to the consequences of opposing Marika's will. The cursed giant, forever bound to its task, became a sentinel, a guardian of a power it could no longer wield freely, a tragic figure of immense power reduced to a perpetual stoker. The victory over the fire giants solidified Queen Marika's authority and the Golden Order's dominance across the lands between in an unprecedented way. It demonstrated that even the most ancient and formidable powers could be brought to heel under the banner of the Erdtree. This triumph was a powerful message to any who might consider resisting the Golden Order's expansion. It cemented Marika's image as an invincible ruler, a divine figure whose will could reshape the very landscape. The lands between, once a patchwork of disparate powers and beliefs, was now firmly under the sway of the Golden Order, its influence radiating outwards from the capital city and the towering Erdtree. The mountaintops of the giants, once a vibrant, albeit harsh domain, were left irrevocably scarred by the conflict. The once proud peaks were now littered with the skeletal remains of fallen giants, their colossal forms frozen in death. The landscape itself bore the wounds of the war, with craters and scorched earth marking the sites of fierce battles. The remaining giant, bound by Marika's curse, stood as a perpetual sentinel, a lonely, suffering guardian of a power it was forced to contain. Its mournful roars, echoing through the desolate peaks, served as a constant reminder of the war's devastating cost and the Golden Order's unyielding power. And so, the flame of ruin, though contained within the body of the last fire giant, remained a latent threat. It was a smoldering ember, a ticking time bomb, a power that, though dormant, still possessed the potential for immense destruction. Marika's actions had not eliminated the threat of the fell god, but merely delayed it, ensuring its continued existence in a controlled environment. This containment, while effective for a time, foreshadowed future events, hinting at a day when the flame of ruin might once again be unleashed, bringing with it a cataclysm that would once again shake the foundations of the lands between. The legacy of the war against the giants, therefore, was not just one of victory and dominion, but also one of a simmering, contained threat, a forgotten ember waiting for the right conditions to ignite once more. This ancient conflict, while seemingly resolved, laid the groundwork for future tragedies and the eventual shattering of the very order Marika had so painstakingly built. The echoes of this war and the power it sought to contain would resonate through the ages, influencing the destinies of countless beings and shaping the very landscape of the lands between for millennia to come. The mountaintops, forever etched with the scars of this war, would remain a place of both immense power and profound tragedy, a silent witness to the enduring legacy of the fell god and the unwavering will of Queen Marika. And so, we arrive at the ancient past, an era defined by the rise of Godfrey and the establishment of the First Golden Order. It is a time when the very fabric of the lands between was reshaped, its destiny irrevocably altered by the will of a distant cosmic entity and the might of an unparalleled warrior. This period marks the true genesis of the Elden Ring's influence, moving beyond the primordial crucible to forge a new order, one built on both divine decree and brutal conquest. At the heart of this transformation was Marika, a figure of immense power and profound mystery. The Greater Will, a powerful outer god, chose Marika to be its vessel, and through her established the Golden Order in the lands between. This was not a casual selection, but a deliberate act of cosmic intervention, identifying Marika as the ideal conduit for its divine influence. Marika, herself a Numen, a race of long-lived otherworldly beings, was elevated to the status of a god, an Empyrean, destined to wield the power of the Elden Ring and shape the fate of an entire world. Her Numen heritage, with its inherent connection to the ethereal and the profound, made her a suitable candidate for such a monumental task, differentiating her from the mortal inhabitants of the lands between. The Greater Will's choice was absolute, and with it, the stage was set for a new age, one where the divine would directly intervene in the affairs of mortals. To solidify this nascent golden order, Marika required a champion, a consort who could embody its strength and enforce its will. This champion came in the form of Godfrey, a fierce warrior known then as Hoarah Loux. He was a figure of immense physical prowess and an unyielding spirit, a leader of men whose very presence inspired both awe and terror. Hoarah Loux, with his raw, untamed ferocity, became Marika's first consort, and in a pivotal moment was bestowed with the title of the First Elden Lord. This union, both political and spiritual, cemented the Golden Order's foundation, providing it with both divine authority through Marika and earthly might through Godfrey. His transformation from the tribal chieftain Hoarah Loux to the regal Elden Lord Godfrey was a symbolic representation of the Golden Order's ability to assimilate and elevate, to bring even the most primal forces under its banner. The very act of becoming Elden Lord signified not just a marriage, but a binding of power, a fusion of the sacred and the martial. With Godfrey at her side, Marika's Golden Order embarked on an ambitious campaign of expansion. Godfrey led Marika's armies in numerous conquests, his legendary strength and strategic brilliance proving instrumental in extending the Golden Order's reach across the entirety of the lands between. These were not mere skirmishes, but full-scale wars of subjugation, where dissenting factions and rival powers were systematically brought to heel. The Golden Order, under Godfrey's command, became a formidable military force, its doctrines enforced by the blade and the shield. From the treacherous swamps of Lernia to the scorching plains of the Altus Plateau, Godfrey's forces marched, leaving a trail of conquered territories and newly established Golden Order outposts. His campaigns were characterized by swift, decisive victories, often achieved through sheer overwhelming force, and Godfrey's personal leadership on the front lines. He was not a general who commanded from afar, but a warrior who fought alongside his soldiers, inspiring them to acts of unparalleled bravery. Godfrey's strength and battle prowess were legendary, embodying the Golden Order's might and crushing its enemies with an almost primal force. His reputation preceded him, striking fear into the hearts of those who dared to oppose Marika's dominion. Tales of his individual feats of strength and his ability to turn the tide of battle through sheer will spread like wildfire throughout the lands between. He was a living embodiment of the Golden Order's power, a testament to its invincibility. It was said that a single swing of his axe could fell a giant, and his roar alone could scatter an army. This wasn't mere hyperbole. Godfrey was a force of nature, a warrior without equal, and his presence on the battlefield was often enough to break the morale of his adversaries. His ferocity was not just a tactic, but an intrinsic part of his being, a core element of his identity as Hoarah Loux. A defining moment in Godfrey's legendary career, and one that solidified his reputation as an unparalleled warrior, was his victory over the Stormlord. This was no ordinary foe, but a great beast of immense power, a creature that had long terrorized a region of the lands between. The battle was epic, a clash of titans that became etched into the collective memory of the people. Godfrey, facing down this monstrous entity, emerged victorious, a testament to his indomitable spirit and his exceptional combat skills. This triumph over the Stormlord was more than just a military victory. It was a symbolic assertion of the Golden Order's dominance over the untamed forces of the world. It demonstrated that even the most ancient and fearsome creatures could be subdued by the will of the Elden Lord. The Stormlord, a creature of immense elemental power, represented the wild, chaotic aspects of the lands between that the Golden Order sought to tame. Godfrey's victory was a resounding declaration that the age of chaos was over and the age of order had begun. As Godfrey's conquests continued, the Erdtree's influence, the physical manifestation of the Golden Order's power, spread across the lands between like a golden tide. This expansion was not always peaceful. It often involved the absorption of other cultures and deities, a process frequently facilitated, if not outright enforced, by Godfrey's military might. Ancient traditions, local gods, and various belief systems that predated the Golden Order were either assimilated or eradicated. The Erdtree, with its radiant grace, became the central pillar of spiritual and political life, demanding allegiance and conformity. This process of assimilation was a key strategy of the Golden Order, ensuring that its dominion was not just military, but also cultural and religious. Any resistance to this absorption was met with the swift and brutal efficiency of Godfrey's armies, leaving little room for dissent. The Golden Order was not merely conquering lands, it was conquering minds and souls, reshaping the spiritual landscape of the lands between in its own image. During this period of expansion and consolidation, Godfrey's children were born, further establishing the golden lineage and ensuring the continuation of Marika's divine bloodline. Among them was Godwyn the Golden, a figure destined for great renown, whose birth cemented the future of the Golden Order. These children represented the future, the promise of an enduring dynasty that would rule the lands between for generations to come. Their existence was a testament to the success of Marika and Godfrey's union, solidifying the idea of a divinely appointed ruling family. The golden lineage was more than just a succession of rulers. It was a symbol of the Golden Order's permanence, its deep roots within the very soil of the lands between. Each child born into this lineage carried the weight of expectation, destined to uphold the ideals and power of the Golden Order. However, as the Golden Order's dominion became absolute, and the last vestiges of resistance were crushed, Godfrey's purpose as a warrior began to wane. The very qualities that had made him indispensable in times of war, his unbridled ferocity and insatiable lust for battle, now seemed to be a liability in an age of peace. The lands between, once a chaotic mosaic of warring factions, was now largely unified under the Erdtree's grace. There were no more grand enemies to conquer, no more major threats to quell. The era of constant warfare, which had been Godfrey's lifeblood, was drawing to a close. This shift created a profound internal conflict for Godfrey, whose identity was so intrinsically linked to his role as a warrior. The cessation of conflict, while a triumph for the Golden Order, presented a personal crisis for its greatest champion. Recognizing this shift, and perhaps foreseeing the potential for Godfrey's untamed nature to disrupt the newfound peace, a unique solution was devised. Godfrey's natural ferocity, the primal essence of Hoarah Loux, was suppressed by Serosh, the Beast Regent. Serosh was bound to Godfrey's back, a constant presence that acted as a spiritual anchor, tempering his bloodlust and ensuring his continued adherence to the Golden Order's more refined ideals. This was not a weakening of Godfrey, but a channeling of his immense power, a means to control the raw, untamed beast within him. Serosh, a majestic and powerful beast himself, served as a living restraint, a symbol of the Golden Order's ability to even tame the most formidable of its champions. The act of binding Serosh to Godfrey was a profound statement about the Golden Order's control, its ability to impose order, not just on the external world, but on the very souls of its most powerful figures. It was a necessary measure to transition Godfrey from a warlord to a more conventional ruler, one fit for an age of peace. The age of warring eventually ended, and with it, Godfrey's grace began to fade, a subtle but significant sign of his diminishing purpose within the established Golden Order. Grace, in the context of the lands between, is not merely divine favor, but a tangible manifestation of the Erdtree's blessing, guiding and empowering those deemed worthy. For Godfrey, whose grace had shone so brightly during his conquests, its dimming was a clear indication that his role as the primary enforcer of the Golden Order was no longer required. His warrior's heart, once fueled by endless battles, now found itself without a worthy adversary. The very source of his power, his connection to the Erdtree's divine light, began to recede, signaling a profound shift in his destiny. This fading grace was not a punishment, but a natural consequence of the Golden Order's triumph, a sign that the era of conquest had given way to an era of consolidation and peace. It was at this critical juncture that Marika, with her enigmatic foresight, made a momentous decision. Perhaps foreseeing a future need, a time when the Golden Order might once again require a champion of unparalleled might, she stripped Godfrey of his grace and exiled him from the lands between. This act was not one of malice, but of calculated strategy, a move designed to preserve him for a future purpose. Godfrey, along with his loyal warriors, was cast out, forced to live and die beyond the fog that surrounded the lands between, forever separated from the Erdtree's light. They became the first tarnished, a lineage of exiles destined to wander the outer lands, their grace lost, their purpose seemingly extinguished. This exile was a profound moment, marking the end of one era and the beginning of a long dormancy for Godfrey. The term tarnished itself speaks to this loss of grace, a fading of the divine light that once guided them. Marika's motivation for Godfrey's exile was not to simply banish him, but to allow him to return in a future age, guided by lost grace, to once again become Elden Lord. She understood that a warrior of Godfrey's caliber, one whose very being was defined by conflict, could not thrive in an age of peace. By stripping him of his grace and sending him into exile, she ensured that his warrior spirit would not be dulled by the tranquility of the Golden Order. Instead, he would be preserved, his strength and ferocity held in reserve, waiting for a time when the lands between would once again require a champion to restore order. The fading of his grace was not an end, but a reset, a preparation for a new beginning. She foresaw a time when the Golden Order might falter, when the Elden Ring itself might be shattered, and in that fractured future, she knew that only a warrior like Godfrey, steeled by exile and guided by the promise of lost grace, could mend what was broken. His banishment was a long-term investment, a strategic move by a goddess who could see beyond the immediate present into the distant, uncertain future. It was a testament to her profound understanding of the cyclical nature of power and the enduring need for a champion, even if that champion had to be temporarily removed from the stage. The first Elden Lord, the mighty Godfrey, was not truly gone. He was merely waiting, a seed planted in the barren lands beyond the fog, awaiting the moment when the lost grace would stir within him once more. We now move forward in our timeline into the ancient past, a period defined by the dramatic rise of new powers and the forging of alliances that would forever reshape the lands between. This era, often referred to as the Age of Radagon and the Carian royal family, marks a pivotal moment in the history of the Golden Order and the emergence of some of its most influential figures. At this time, the majestic region of Lurnia of the Lakes, a sprawling expanse of shimmering waters and ancient ruins, was under the sovereign rule of the Carian royal family. At its head was Queen Renala, a figure of profound magical prowess and serene authority. Liurnia itself was a land steeped in ancient sorcery, its very essence intertwined with the mysteries of the cosmos and the worship of the moon. The Carian royal family, with their mastery of glintstone sorcery, a magical tradition drawing power from the stars and the moon, had established a formidable dominion, their influence radiating throughout the crystalline spires of the Raya Lucarian Academy, the heart of their magical learning and power. Their culture was one of intellectual pursuit, arcane study, and a deep reverence for the celestial bodies that governed their magic. Concurrently, the Golden Order, under the undisputed leadership of Queen Marika the Eternal, was aggressively expanding its dominion across the lands between. This expansion was not always peaceful. Often, it involved the subjugation of independent factions and the assimilation of their territories, sometimes through negotiation, but more frequently through outright conquest. Marika's vision for the lands between was one of unified faith and universal adherence to the tenets of the Erdtree, the colossal golden tree that symbolized the Golden Order's divine authority and the source of its power. The Golden Order's forces, composed of zealous knights and powerful incantation wielders, were a relentless tide sweeping across the diverse landscapes, bringing both order and, for many, subjugation. It was into this volatile landscape that Radagon emerged as a champion of the Golden Order, a figure of immense martial prowess and unwavering loyalty to Marika. Radagon was dispatched to lead the Golden Order's armies against the Carian royal family in Liurnia. His mission was clear: to bring the independent, sorcery-focused kingdom under the sway of the Erdtree and the Golden Order. This marked the beginning of a brutal and protracted conflict, a clash of ideologies as much as it was a clash of arms. The Golden Order, with its focus on faith-based incantations and physical might, sought to impose its will upon the Carians, who relied on their intricate and devastating glintstone sorceries, drawing power from the very fabric of the cosmos. The ensuing war was characterized by fierce engagements across the watery expanses of Liurnia. Golden Order knights, clad in their distinctive armor, charged against barrages of shimmering glintstone spells, their faith-fueled incantations meeting the cold, calculated magic of the Carian sorcerers. The conflict was prolonged and bloody, each side demonstrating remarkable resilience and devastating power. The Carian royal family, with their mastery of glintstone sorcery, proved to be far more formidable than perhaps the Golden Order had anticipated. Their defenses, particularly around the magnificent Hoarah Loux Academy, were nigh impenetrable, protected by powerful magical wards and the concentrated might of their most skilled sorcerers. Despite Radagon's undeniable martial prowess and the relentless pressure of the Golden Order's armies, he found himself repeatedly unable to fully conquer the Carian stronghold of Hoarah Loux Academy. The Academy, a bastion of learning and magical power, was more than just a fortress. It was the spiritual and intellectual heart of Carian sorcery, its defenses bolstered by centuries of arcane knowledge and the unwavering dedication of its scholars and practitioners. The Carian sorcerers, under Renala's guidance, proved to be cunning and adaptable, employing intricate magical strategies to repel the Golden Order's advances, turning the very landscape of Liurnia into a defensive advantage. The stalemate, costly for both sides, eventually led to an unexpected resolution: a marriage. In a move that surprised many, Radagon, the champion of the Golden Order, eventually married Renala, Queen of the Full Moon. This union was not born of love, at least initially, but of strategic necessity and a desire to end the devastating conflict. It was a political marriage of immense significance, effectively uniting the Golden Order and the Carian royal family, and by extension, their distinct magical traditions. This alliance brought about a temporary but much needed peace between the two powerful factions, halting the bloodshed and allowing for a period of integration and mutual influence. The marriage of Radagon and Renala marked a fascinating convergence of magical philosophies. The stern, faith-based incantations of the Golden Order, drawing power from the Erdtree and the Greater Will, began to intertwine with the intricate, cosmic-oriented glintstone sorceries of the Carians. This period saw a unique exchange of knowledge and a blending of magical practices, creating new forms of magic and fostering a deeper, albeit sometimes uneasy, understanding between the two previously warring cultures. From this powerful union, three children were born: Ricard, Radon, and Rani. These were not ordinary offspring. They were demigods, inheriting aspects of both their parents' formidable lineages. Ricard, the eldest, possessed a fierce intellect and a thirst for forbidden knowledge, foreshadowing his later descent into blasphemy. Radon, the mightiest of the three, inherited his father's immense strength and martial prowess, becoming a legendary warrior. Rani, the enigmatic daughter, inherited her mother's deep connection to the moon and stars and a profound mastery of lunar sorcery, destined for a path that would challenge the very fabric of the Golden Order. Their birth solidified the alliance, creating a powerful new generation that embodied the synthesis of Golden Order might and carrion magic. However, this period of relative peace and powerful union was not destined to last. The tranquil facade of the Carrion Golden Order alliance was shattered by Radagon's eventual departure. He abandoned Renala, leaving her in the Grand Library of Raya Lucarian Academy with a solitary enigmatic gift, an amber egg. This egg, containing a great rune, would become Renala's sole focus, a tangible, if bittersweet, memento of her lost love and the shattered alliance. She would cradle it in an unending vigil, her once sharp mind slowly succumbing to a profound grief and a singular obsession with the amber egg, a symbol of a past that could never be reclaimed. Radagon's abandonment of Renala was driven by a revelation that would send shockwaves through the lands between and fundamentally alter the course of its history. He left Liurnia to become Queen Marika's second consort, a move that publicly unveiled his true identity as Marika's other half. This startling revelation confirmed what many had perhaps suspected in hushed whispers. Radagon and Marika were in fact two halves of the same divine being, a single entity fractured into two distinct forms. With Radagon now openly serving as Marika's consort, the Golden Order's dominance was solidified beyond question. This act further intertwined the fates of the two most powerful figures in the lands between, creating an even more unified and formidable ruling power, at least on the surface. Radagon's departure left Renala in a state of perpetual grief and mental decline. Her once brilliant mind, renowned for its mastery of sorcery, became clouded by sorrow and obsession. While she retained her formidable magical abilities, her focus narrowed, her world shrinking to the confines of the Grand Library and the amber egg she clutched. She became a tragic figure, a queen undone by love and abandonment, her immense power now channeled into a singular, heartbreaking devotion. The Carrion royal family, while still influential due to their historical legacy and control over the Raya Lucarian Academy, lost some of its direct political power following Radagon's abandonment of Renala. The alliance with the Golden Order, once a strategic advantage, now felt more like a subjugation, albeit a quiet one. The Carrions, though still respected for their magical prowess, found themselves in a more subdued position, their direct influence over the broader politics of the lands between diminished. Meanwhile, the children of Radagon and Renala, now fully acknowledged as demigods, began to forge their own paths, each destined for significant and often tumultuous roles in the coming ages. Rykard, with his insatiable curiosity, would delve into forbidden rites. Radon, the mighty warrior, would become a fearsome general, his strength unmatched. Rani, the enigmatic sorceress, would embark on a quest to defy the very order established by her parents, setting in motion events that would ultimately lead to the shattering of the Elden Ring itself. This era, therefore, serves as a crucial foundation, laying the groundwork for the epic conflicts and personal tragedies that would define the later history of the lands between, and ultimately the fate of the Tarnished. Transitioning from the relative stability, albeit complex, of the age of Radagon and the Carian royal family, we now arrive at the recent past, a period defined by cataclysmic upheaval known as the Shattering. This era begins with an event of profound consequence, one that irrevocably altered the destiny of the lands between and set into motion the very journey you, the Tarnished, are destined to undertake. The catalyst for this tumultuous age was the assassination of Godwyn the Golden. This wasn't merely a political murder, but an act imbued with dark magic and cosmic significance. The perpetrators were the Black Knives, a clandestine group of assassins. What made their attack so singularly devastating was the weapon they wielded, fragments of the Rune of Death, stolen from Malekith, Marika's shadow, and the keeper of this potent, forbidden power. This rune, once a fundamental component of the Elden Ring, had been sealed away by Marika herself, precisely to prevent such an atrocity. Its reintroduction into the world, even in splintered form, was an act of profound heresy and a violation of the established order. The Black Knives, shrouded in mystery, executed their task with chilling precision, striking at the very heart of the Golden lineage. Godwyn the Golden, beloved son of Queen Marika, and Godfrey, the first Elden Lord, was the first demigod to experience true death. This distinction is crucial. While other beings had perished before, Godwyn's demise was unique. The Black Knife's use of the Rune of Death ensured that his soul was utterly extinguished, a fate previously considered impossible for a demigod. However, in a cruel twist of fate, his physical form remained, a grotesque mockery of life, his body left intact, but his spirit irrevocably gone. This unnatural state of being, a soul dead but body present existence, would later manifest as the Prince of Death, a horrifying entity whose influence would spread like a blight across the roots of the Erdtree, corrupting the very fabric of life and death in the lands between. The implications of this partial death were far-reaching, creating a fundamental imbalance that would plague the world for ages to come, a testament to the sheer power and danger of the Rune of Death when wielded outside its intended purpose. The mastermind behind this audacious plot was none other than Ranni the Witch. Daughter of Radagon and Rennala, and thus a demigod herself, Ranni harbored a deep-seated desire to break free from the suffocating influence of the Greater Will, the outer god that had bestowed the Elden Ring upon Marika and guided the Golden Order. Ranni believed that her destiny, and indeed the destiny of the lands between, was being dictated by an external, alien force, one that stifled true freedom and self-determination. To achieve her liberation, she orchestrated her own death, a ritual known as the Night of Black Knives. While Godwyn's soul was killed, Ranni's plan involved severing her own flesh from her spirit using the stolen Rune of Death, effectively casting aside her physical body to become a spirit, a being unbound by the constraints of the flesh and, crucially, beyond the direct control of the greater will. Her motivation was not malice towards Godwyn, but a calculated, ruthless act of self-liberation, a sacrifice to achieve what she perceived as a higher freedom for herself and ultimately for the lands between. The simultaneous deaths, one of the soul and one of the flesh, were a complex magical ritual designed to circumvent the absolute power of the rune of death while achieving specific, desired outcomes for both participants. The immediate consequence of Godwyn's death and Ronnie's ritual was a profound shockwave that reverberated through the very core of the Golden Order. Queen Marika, the vessel of the Elden Ring and the divine ruler of the lands between, reacted with an act of unimaginable power and defiance. In her profound grief over the loss of her son, or perhaps in a fit of righteous fury against the perceived injustice and the limitations imposed upon her by the greater will, Marika shattered the Elden Ring. This was not a mere act of destruction, but a cosmic event of unparalleled magnitude. The Elden Ring, the very embodiment of the laws of the world, fractured into numerous pieces, its great runes scattering across the lands between like fragments of a shattered divinity. This act, whether born of sorrow or rebellion, fundamentally altered the reality of the world, dismantling the established order and ushering in an era of chaos. The shattering of the Elden Ring was, in essence, the shattering of the world's governing principles, leaving a power vacuum and a landscape ripe for conflict. The greater will, the distant and inscrutable outer god that had guided Marika and the Golden Order for millennia, responded to this act of defiance with abandonment. Its influence, once pervasive and absolute, receded from the lands between. The Erdtree, the colossal golden tree that symbolized the greater will's dominion and the source of the Golden Order's power, entered a state of decay. Its golden leaves, once vibrant and life-giving, began to wither, and its once unyielding branches showed signs of blight. This abandonment by the greater will left a void, a spiritual and political vacuum that would soon be filled by the ambitions of Marika's offspring. The Erdtree's decay was a physical manifestation of the fading divine presence, a silent testament to the rupture between the lands between and its celestial patron. The guidance of grace, once a clear beacon for worthy individuals, became fragmented and unreliable, a flickering ember in a darkening world. With the Elden Ring shattered and the greater will withdrawn, a mad scramble for power ensued. The various demigods, Marika's children and stepchildren, each driven by their own ambitions, desires, and interpretations of the New World Order, claimed the scattered great runes. These fragments of the Elden Ring imbued their wielders with immense power, transforming them into beings of near divine might. Each great rune carried a unique aspect of the Elden Ring's former authority, and its possession granted its wielder dominion over certain aspects of reality or enhanced their inherent abilities to an extraordinary degree. Godric the Grafted, a descendant of Godfrey, claimed one, using its power to fuel his grotesque grafting experiments. Renala, though not a demigod by birth, possessed a great rune, though her power was more tied to her carrion sorcery than to direct Elden Ring influence. Rykard, Lordess of Blasphemy, embraced a great rune, twisting its power to serve his heretical ambitions. Mog, Lord of Blood, and Morgott, the Omen King, both Omen children of Marika, also claimed great runes, their unique circumstances shaping how they wielded this newfound power. The acquisition of these great runes set the stage for an inevitable collision of wills and ambitions, as each demigod sought to assert their dominance in the fractured realm. Among these powerful demigods, two figures stand out for their tragic fates and immense power: Millennia, the Blade of Miquella, and Radon, the Star Scourge. Millennia, one of the twin children of Marika and Radagon, was born afflicted by the scarlet rot, a devastating and incurable disease. This outer god, an ancient and malevolent entity, manifests as a horrific, corrosive plague, slowly consuming its victims from within. Millennia, despite her divine lineage, was not immune to its ravages. Her life was a constant battle against the encroaching decay, a struggle she often waged with incredible martial prowess, earning her the title Blade of Miquella for her unwavering devotion to her brother. The scarlet rot was not merely a physical ailment, but a spiritual and existential threat, threatening to transform her into a vessel for the outer god's destructive will. Her struggle against the rot was a testament to her indomitable spirit, but also a source of immense vulnerability and a driver of many of the events that would follow. Radon, the Star Scourge, was another demigod of immense power, son of Radagon and Renala. His story is one of profound sacrifice and stoic duty. Following the shattering of the Elden Ring and the subsequent chaos, Radon, a master of gravity magic, took it upon himself to hold the stars in place. This seemingly impossible feat was a desperate measure to prevent the return of the outer god of the dark moon, an entity associated with fate and destiny, whose influence Radon believed would plunge the lands between into an even deeper despair. His motivation stemmed from a deep love for his adopted home and a desire to protect it from further cosmic meddling. By halting the celestial bodies, Radon effectively froze the flow of destiny, preventing the arrival of a new age, whether it be an age of stars or something far more sinister. This act, while heroic, also demanded an immense toll on him, requiring constant exertion of his prodigious gravitational powers, a burden that would eventually contribute to his tragic decline. With the great runes claimed and ambitions running rampant, a devastating war erupted among the demigods. This conflict, known as the Shattering, plunged the lands between into an era of unprecedented chaos and destruction. Each demigod, bolstered by their great rune, sought to consolidate power, expand their territories, and ultimately claim the mantle of Elden Lord. The once unified kingdom fractured into warring factions, each vying for supremacy. Castles became fortresses, once peaceful lands became battlefields, and the very fabric of society unraveled under the relentless onslaught of demigod armies. The Golden Order, once the guiding principle of the lands between, was now a distant memory, replaced by the brutal reality of ceaseless warfare. The landscapes you traverse in the game bear the scars of this devastating conflict, from the ruined castles to the desolate battlefields, each telling a silent story of the Shattering's brutal legacy. The climax of this devastating war, and arguably its most cataclysmic event, was the duel between Millennia, the Blade of Miquella, and Radon, as the Star Scourge. This clash of titans took place in Caelid, a region that would forever bear the scars of their encounter. Radon, with his mastery of gravity magic and his immense physical strength, was a formidable opponent. Millennia, despite her affliction, was a peerless warrior, her fluid movements and deadly blade unmatched. Their battle was a spectacle of raw power, a maelstrom of steel and magic that shook the very foundations of the earth. As the duel raged, with neither demigod able to gain a decisive advantage, Millennia, pushed to her absolute limits, unleashed her ultimate weapon, the Scarlet Aeonia. This devastating ability, a manifestation of the Scarlet Rot's full power, transformed her into a blooming flower of pure rot, radiating a corrosive energy that consumed everything in its path. It was an act of desperation, a last resort against an unyielding foe. Millennia's Scarlet Aeonia devastated Caelid. The once fertile lands were instantly transformed into a blighted wasteland, a horrifying testament to the Scarlet Rot's destructive potential. The very air became toxic, the ground turned to putrid swamps, and grotesque, rot-infested creatures began to emerge from the corrupted earth. The catastrophic explosion of rot not only ravaged the landscape, but also afflicted Radon with the very disease Millennia had fought her entire life. Though he survived the direct impact, the scarlet rot began to slowly consume him, eroding his mind and body, turning the once proud Star Scourge into a maddened beast. He became a shadow of his former self, his once noble duty replaced by a mindless hunger. This tragic outcome left both combatants severely incapacitated and Caelid forever scarred, a perpetual monument to the destructive power unleashed during the shattering. The lingering effects of the Scarlet Ionia would continue to plague Caelid, making it one of the most perilous regions in the lands between, a constant reminder of the war's ultimate cost. In the aftermath of the Shattering's most destructive battles, with the world in disarray and his beloved sister Malenia succumbing ever further to the Scarlet Rot, Miquella, Millennia's twin brother and a demigod of unparalleled intellect and compassion, embarked on a desperate quest. Recognizing the futility of conventional remedies and the limitations of the Golden Order's magic, Miquella sought to elevate himself to godhood. His ultimate goal was to create a new, unalloyed form of divinity, one capable of curing Millennia's rot and offering salvation to all who suffered. To achieve this, he immured himself within the Erdtree, a colossal, self-sustaining tree of his own creation. The Erdtree was intended to be a sanctuary, a haven where Miquella could undergo a profound transformation, shedding his demigod status to become a true god, free from the influence of the greater will and its inherent limitations. Within the Erdtree, Miquella entered a state of slumber, a chrysalis from which he hoped to emerge as a benevolent deity, a new hope for the lands between. However, Miquella's noble aspirations were tragically interrupted. Mog, the Lord of Blood, another demigod, and an omen son of Marika, harbored his own twisted ambitions. Obsessed with Miquella's potential and driven by a perverse desire to establish his own dynasty, Mog abducted the slumbering Miquella from the Erdtree. Mog, who had aligned himself with an outer god, known as the Formless Mother, believed that by raising Miquella as his consort and a new god, he could usher in an age of blood and chaos, a perverse mirror of the Golden Order. He transported Miquella to his hidden domain, the Mogwin Dynasty Mausoleum, where he began a gruesome ritual, attempting to nurture Miquella's nascent divinity for his own nefarious purposes. This abduction was a profound betrayal, not only of Miquella's trust, but also of the hopes for a cure for Millennia and the lands between. Miquella, in his state of suspended animation, became a pawn in Mog's dark schemes, his potential for salvation twisted into a tool for destruction. And so, With the lands between utterly fractured, its demigods locked in endless conflict, its people suffering under the weight of war and disease, and its divine order shattered, the stage was set for a new protagonist. The tarnished, individuals once exiled from the lands between by the greater will itself, were called back. The guidance of grace, once a clear path, now flickered and beckoned, drawing these champions from their distant lands. You, the tarnished, are among them. Your purpose, to journey through this ravaged realm, overcome the demigods, claim their great runes, and ultimately become the Elden Lord, restoring order to a world teetering on the brink of utter collapse. Your arrival marks the beginning of the present age, the age of your journey, a quest to mend the broken world and forge a new destiny for the lands between. Following the cataclysmic events of the Shattering, which plunged the lands between into an era of unprecedented chaos and devastation, we arrive at our eighth entry in the timeline, the Long Night and the Tarnished's Return. This period, often referred to as the recent past, marks the direct prelude to the player character's journey and the unfolding narrative of Elden Ring. With the Elden Ring sundered and its power fragmented, the once glorious lands between were left in a state of profound disarray. No true Elden Lord sat upon the throne, and the very fabric of reality seemed to fray at the edges, a testament to the absence of the unifying power that once held everything together. The Golden Order, once the dominant religious and political force, found its authority fractured, its tenets questioned, and its adherents scattered. The various demigods, children and descendants of Queen Marika, now held sway over their own fractured domains, each nursing ambitions of kingship, further exacerbating the instability of the realm. The once vibrant cities and thriving landscapes began to decay, swallowed by encroaching wilderness and the grim reality of perpetual conflict. Amidst this desolation, a profound mystery persisted, the fate of Queen Marika, the Eternal herself. The very monarch who had shattered the Elden Ring, her motivations shrouded in enigma, was now imprisoned within the very heart of the Erdtree, the colossal golden tree that dominated the horizon of the lands between. Her confinement was a closely guarded secret, known only to a select few, and her absence left a gaping void in the spiritual and political landscape. The common folk, and even many of the demigods, were largely unaware of her true predicament, believing her to be merely absent or perhaps even deceased. This ignorance fueled speculation and fear, contributing to the pervasive sense of uncertainty that gripped the land. Her imprisonment, a consequence of her rebellion against the greater will, served as a stark reminder of the immense power wielded by the outer gods and the dire consequences of defying their cosmic decrees. The Erdtree, once a symbol of life and divine grace, now held its queen captive, a silent monument to a fractured divinity. In the wake of this divine upheaval, the greater will, the enigmatic and powerful outer god that had once bestowed the Elden Ring upon Marika, found itself in a precarious position. Its primary instrument of control, the Elden Ring, was broken, and its chosen vessel, Marika, was imprisoned. To restore order and reassert its dominion over the lands between, the greater will, operating through its emissaries, the Two Fingers, initiated a desperate gambit. Their objective was clear: to seek out a new Elden Lord, an individual capable of mending the shattered Elden Ring and re-establishing the Golden Order. The Two Fingers, Ancient and revered interpreters of the greater will's cosmic pronouncements began to send out subtle yet undeniable signals across the vast expanse of the lands between. These ethereal emanations, known as the guidance of grace, were not random. They were specifically directed towards a long forgotten lineage of warriors. This guidance of grace, a divine blessing once bestowed upon those favored by the Erdtree, had long been lost to a specific group known as the Tarnished. For centuries, these individuals had been stripped of their grace, their golden eyes fading to a dull gray, and exiled from the lands between. They were considered anathema, a forgotten people, their very existence a historical footnote. However, with the lands between in desperate need of salvation, the greater will, through the two fingers, saw fit to retract its banishment. The guidance of grace, a golden light visible only to those it called, began to return, beckoning these exiled warriors back to the land from which they had been cast out. This unexpected return of grace was a pivotal moment, signaling a shift in divine strategy and a desperate attempt to restore equilibrium to a crumbling world. The golden light, once a symbol of their banishment, now became their guiding star, drawing them inexorably back to the heart of the conflict. These tarnished, once ostracized and forgotten, were now called upon to fulfill a destiny of unimaginable proportions, to become the next Elden Lord. Their lineage, though long dormant, carried a faint echo of the ancient glory that once permeated the lands between. They were, in essence, the last hope for a dying world. Their return was not a matter of choice for many, but a powerful, undeniable pull, a divine imperative that resonated deep within their very beings. The guidance of grace, though sometimes cryptic, was a constant companion, pointing them towards their ultimate goal. Their journey would be fraught with peril, for the lands between had become a brutal and unforgiving realm, teeming with monstrous creatures, vengeful demigods, and the lingering scars of a cosmic war. Yet the promise of becoming Elden Lord, of mending the shattered ring and restoring order, was a powerful motivator, a beacon in the encroaching darkness. The unique physiological state of the tarnished further underscored their extraordinary nature. They were often referred to as dead who yet live, a paradoxical existence born from their prolonged exile from the lands between. When they were banished, they were stripped of their grace, and with it, their ability to truly die. Instead, upon suffering a fatal blow, their spirits would simply return to a nearby site of grace, a form of resurrection that, while granting them tenacity, also condemned them to an endless cycle of struggle. This peculiar condition made them uniquely suited for the arduous task ahead, as they could endure countless defeats and continue their quest, undeterred by the finality of death that plagued others. Their banishment, once a curse, had inadvertently forged them into resilient, unyielding instruments of fate, capable of facing challenges that would break lesser mortals. This cycle of death and rebirth, while granting them perseverance, also instilled a profound sense of weariness, a constant reminder of their unnatural existence. The call of grace was not exclusive to a single individual. Indeed, many tarnished attempted the perilous journey back to the lands between. From across the sea, from forgotten corners of the world, they heeded the silent summons, their hearts filled with a mixture of hope, ambition, and a lingering sense of duty. However, the path to becoming Elden Lord was not for the faint of heart. The lands between, scarred by the shattering, presented an endless array of challenges: formidable beasts, cunning enemies, treacherous landscapes, and the formidable power of the demigods themselves. Few succeeded in overcoming these monumental obstacles. Many fell along the way, their journeys cut short by the countless dangers that lurked in every shadow. Their bodies, if not devoured by beasts, would simply return to a site of grace, only for their spirits to eventually lose their way, succumbing to despair or simply fading into oblivion. The path of the tarnished was one of relentless trial, a gauntlet designed to weed out all but the most determined and resilient. Among those who sought to understand and influence the unfolding events was Gideon Ofnir, the All-Knowing. A prominent figure within the tarnished community, Gideon was a scholar, an archivist, and a master of information. From his sanctuary within the Round Table Hold, he tirelessly gathered intelligence on the demigods, their strengths, their weaknesses, and the intricate lore surrounding the Elden Ring. His vast knowledge made him an invaluable resource for many tarnished, offering guidance, warnings, and strategic insights. He saw himself as a shepherd of sorts, guiding worthy tarnished towards their destiny while simultaneously pursuing his own elusive understanding of the greater will's ultimate design. His motivations, while seemingly benevolent, were often shrouded in a veil of self-interest and a profound desire to comprehend the grand tapestry of the lands between. He believed that true knowledge was the ultimate power, and he sought to acquire it at any cost, even if it meant manipulating others to achieve his ends. Another crucial figure in the Tarnished's journey was Anya, the finger reader. Stationed at the Round Table Hold, Anya served as the primary interpreter of the cryptic pronouncements of the two fingers. Her ancient wisdom and unique connection to the greater will allowed her to decipher the often ambiguous messages conveyed through the two fingers' gestures and movements. For the Tarnished, her interpretations were vital, providing clarity and direction amidst the uncertainty of their quest. She was a conduit between the divine and the mortal, offering guidance and insight into the greater will's intentions. Her role was not merely to translate, but to imbue the divine messages with context and meaning, helping the Tarnished understand their place within the grand cosmic drama unfolding around them. Her presence at the Round Table Hold underscored the importance of divine guidance in the Tarnished's perilous undertaking, offering a glimmer of clarity in a world shrouded in mystery. However, for many Tarnished, the most personal and profound connection to their destiny came through Melina, a mysterious maiden who offered an accord to the player character. Unlike other Tarnished, the player character was initially without a finger maiden, a crucial companion who could channel the power of runes and guide them through their journey. Melina, shrouded in an aura of enigma, stepped into this void, offering her services as a finger maiden in exchange for the Tarnished's assistance in reaching the base of the Erdtree. Her motivations were complex and deeply personal, hinting at a hidden agenda and a destiny intertwined with the very fate of the lands between. She was a silent observer, a guiding hand, and a source of profound wisdom, her words often laced with a melancholic beauty. Her presence transformed the solitary journey of the Tarnished into a shared quest, forging a bond that would prove pivotal in the struggle against the shattered order. The core objective laid out for the Tarnished was both simple and daunting: to defeat the demigod shard-bearers and claim their great runes. These great runes were not merely powerful artifacts, they were fragments of the shattered Elden Ring itself, each imbued with immense power and representing a piece of the divine order. The demigods, children, and direct descendants of Queen Marika, had each claimed a great rune during the shattering, twisting its power to their own ends and establishing their dominion over various regions of the lands between. To mend the Elden Ring, the Tarnished would need to confront these formidable beings, overcome their unique challenges, and reclaim the fragments of divine power they held. This task was a true test of strength, skill, and resolve, as each demigod presented a distinct and often terrifying obstacle, forcing the Tarnished to adapt and grow with every encounter. The great runes were the keys to unlocking the Elden Ring's true power, and their retrieval was paramount to restoring order. As the Tarnished began their arduous journey, the Round Table Hold emerged as a vital sanctuary and gathering place. This ethereal stronghold, accessible only through sites of grace, served as a neutral ground where Tarnished and their allies could rest, recuperate, and exchange information. Within its ancient walls, blacksmiths honed weapons, sorcerers shared arcane knowledge, and merchants offered their wares. It was a beacon of hope in a desolate world, a place where the scattered remnants of a dying civilization could find common ground and forge alliances. The Round Table Hold was more than just a physical location. It was a symbol of unity, a testament to the enduring spirit of those who sought to mend the shattered world. It was here that the Tarnished could find solace, guidance, and the camaraderie necessary to endure the immense pressures of their quest. The first major obstacle for many Tarnished, a true baptism by fire, came in the form of Margit, the Fell Omen. This formidable sentinel, a monstrous figure wielding a glowing staff and radiating an aura of malevolent power, guarded the treacherous path to Stormvale Castle. Margit was a test of fundamental combat skills, a gatekeeper designed to weed out those deemed unworthy of continuing their journey. His imposing presence and relentless attacks served as a harsh introduction to the brutal realities of the lands between, forcing Tarnished to learn quickly or face swift defeat. His defeat marked a significant milestone for many, a clear indication that they possessed the nascent strength and determination required to face even greater challenges that lay ahead. Margit was not merely an enemy.